Eurozone leaders have worked with Greece to come up with a negotiation to, quote unquote, rescue Greece from its economic meltdown. Now, the details of the negotiation or the agreement that they've come up with basically calls for more austerity and more strife for people that are living in Greece currently. Let me give you some examples of what the conditions are. Greece won a conditional agreement to receive a possible $86 billion euros or $95 billion over the next 3 years. As part of the deal, Eurozone finance ministers will discuss on Monday how to keep Greece financed during the time it will need to agree to a bailout, but none of the options appear easy. So, Athens might have to meet a very tight timetable for enacting unpopular reforms of value-added tax, pensions, budget cuts, bankruptcy rules, and an EU banking law that could be used to make big depositors take losses. And also, as Greece has had to deal with in the past, they have to continue raising taxes, cutting governmental programs that help the needy. I mean, these are the things that put Greece into a huge mess to begin with. But it's kind of difficult to convince taxpayers in Germany to agree to any type of negotiation unless Greece does go through with more austerity measures.
So there's a bunch that really frustrates me about this agreement. So the one I'm going to start with, you might find ironic, but I'd like to defend the rich of Greece. Mm-hmm. And so this is a very complicated issue. I'm going to way oversimplify it. But so it's going to make the big depositors take losses. Okay, I know that there's some behind-the-scenes logic to that based on who's depositing money in the Greek banks, etc. But remember that originally private bankers had given money to Greece. Europe bailed them out, which then turned it into Europe versus Greece, Germany versus Greece. But originally it wasn't the German people who gave the loans to the Greek government, right?
It was private.
It was private bankers. So, okay, now explain to me why it makes more sense and is more just for random depositors in Greece to just get some of their money taken from them. Mm-hmm. It was a deposit they put in a bank, and that money gets taken from them, as opposed to the guys who made the poor decision to lend Greece money in the first place. Like taking their money, they got a tiny bit of a haircut. You know, it depends on your perspective on small, right? When Europe bailed them out, basically. But shouldn't the guy who made the bad loan take the much bigger cut? Doesn't that make 1,000 times more sense? Isn't that just common business? Sometimes you make a loan and it doesn't go your way.
That's the risk you make when you get a loan.
Right.
That's right. If it was no risk, well, then you wouldn't get any return for it. I mean, do we have to teach capitalism to these people? So the problem is they're not practicing capitalism, the same as the bank bailout here in America. Private bankers get into trouble, and they go, oh, we didn't mean capitalism, man. We didn't mean capitalism. Can somebody bail us out? Okay, you guys bail us out, and then you have your people fight amongst each other. The poor versus the middle class, the Germans versus the Greeks.
Will jeopardize the economy of an entire people, right? Mm-hmm. Particularly the poor in that country, a poor that has expanded massively over the last 5 years. But we will not put at risk bankers. That we will not do.
Yeah, there's
Isn't that amazing? That's such a great point by Ben.
Not even at risk. Like you won't even have to take a loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want people to understand, like, they're not, the European government officials aren't just corrupt and they're doing it for evil reasons and they're et cetera. Like, they genuinely believe, oh my God, wait, there's more at stake here. If those private banks go under, it'll create a collapse of our banking system, worldwide economic problems, let alone in Europe. Like, we get that. We're not unsophisticated in those regards. But at the same time, how often are we going to let the private bankers hold our entire economy hostage? When I make good loans, I take all the money. I take all the money. When I make bad loans, like, oh, wait, now you don't want to endanger your whole economy, do you? Bail me out.
Nope.
So then Ben is ultimately right, because then the bankers are getting a higher priority than an entire country.
It's not just bankers, sorry to interrupt you, Ben. It's not just bankers in Europe either. It's bankers here in the United States that made those loans under questionable circumstances. They knew that Greece was trying to hide some of the debt that they had, but they continuously loaned Greece money knowing that it was probably unlikely that Greece would be able to pay those loans back. So it's European banks, it's absolutely, banks in the United States as well. And who gets to suffer? Just like in the United States, it's the people living in Greece. The people living in Greece are dealing with children who are hungry right now, pensions that are being cut, money that they've saved and now they don't really have as much access to. So you guys are absolutely right about that. I mean, there are a lot of different factors at play in this story, and it seems like those who gave out the loans are the ones that don't have to suffer any consequences at all.
Let me disagree with something Cenk said also, just for a minute, or challenge it. Not so much disagree with it, but like, I got it. We're vaguely sophisticated here, or at least you're vaguely sophisticated here, regarding what the concerns are of the European democracies and what those European countries are fearing if they don't protect those private banks. There was a fly there. I wasn't. This doesn't mean anything. Yeah, that's a little symbol. It's go time. The people watching will understand. But that said, during this negotiation, this 17-hour negotiation that they had, there is a massive degree, it reads to me, of pettiness. Like, you didn't take that deal before, and now we're going to be extra mean. Like, if there was a deal that was good enough 2 weeks ago, and they are angry that Tsipras, is that how we say his name?
Yeah, roughly, that's how I'm saying it. And his rap group, Syriza.
that Tsipras didn't take it, and then they have the referendum. You can't punish Greece. This deal should not be worse than the deal you offered 2 weeks ago for 1,000 principles of decency.
Yeah, well, I hear you on that. So let me, in an ironic way, again, defend Europe and the Germans here. Because they're saying, hey, listen, you decided to stretch this out for a couple of weeks and went to a referendum. And in the meantime, your credit worthiness took an enormous dive, which then cost you an extra 20 to 50 billion euros. Now you're in a much worse hole than you were 2 weeks ago. I can't give you the same deal because then I'm in a much worse hole than I was 2 weeks ago. As long as that is the sole reasoning for it, as long as, well, now you need 22 billion more, and therefore we got to structure a way that you got to show us that you can pay back that 22 billion more, which is going to require these cuts. It reads to me differently. It reads to me that there is some degree of punitive anger in that. But what's interesting, also, this is what I wanted to ask you, because then Anna, I think you'll like this question that I'm going to ask Cenk, because like, I feel like Cenk would have taken the Tsipras strategy, right? Which was, no, I'm going to push these guys to the limit. I'm going to fight. We're going to go to war. I'm not going to roll over to you guys. And he didn't. He took him. He took it to the end. He pushes the brink. He's like, what now? Oh, okay. Like, and it turned out the what now was worse. Yeah. So, so what would I have done? So, yeah, no, I mean, do you admire that in this case? No, I mean, so if you're Tsipras, you can't be bluffing, right? The stakes are too large. I don't mind the push all in strategy. I'm always pushing all in, right? So, but you would say he was bluffing, like, because in the end, he knew he had. If he gets down to this, and they're like, okay, look here, let me read you another part of the deal here, which I think is very important. The sequestration of Greek state assets worth 50 billion euros, including recapitalized banks in a trust fund beyond government reach, to be sold off primarily to pay down debt. So that means anything worth over 50 billion euros in Greek government assets, they can't touch. And the Germans, again, I shouldn't just say Germans, the Europeans can come in and say, yeah, we're not taking that and privatizing it and selling it off. Right. Okay. And you have to use that money to pay down the debt. Yeah. No. This deal, which then gets to my ultimate conclusion on this, which is that I don't think this deal will stand. Right. Okay. So now there's some chance at Wednesday when the Greek parliament votes for it, it will immediately go under. Now Tsipras is saying, if it appears, based on the reporting, if you're in Syriza, I'll kick you out of the band if you don't vote my way. And so we're going to get this vote positive on Wednesday. Maybe, maybe not. There is definitely an internal revolt at the terms of this, which are draconian. But even if they make it through Wednesday, the whole 3 years, they're not going to make it, man. This is, because when you impose terms this strict, this draconian, at some point, the people's back breaks. And it's a bad situation to force people into. Now, some people are comparing it to the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 when we crushed the Germans after World War I and made them pay, and yeah, we got them, but then it turns out, oh, they got us, and that was a bad idea. The German government dismisses that out of hand, says that's outrageous, ridiculous, etc. But there is a limit to how much people can take. So if you're saying, hey, look, Greeks, you were originally retiring at the age of 58, Now they've got them up to 65, 67. Okay, we hear you because the rest of Europe's around there, and you get fair is fair. You got to deal with your pensions. I think everybody gets that, right? But if you go beyond a certain tolerable limit, intolerable things will happen. So I don't want that, man. Have you seen Golden Dawn in Greece? That's the far right party, right? You don't like Syriza. Wait till you get a load of Golden Dawn, right? So I think this is a bad deal, not just for the Greeks, but for all of Europe, and I think it will break at some point.
The bigger issue is selling it to the German people. Because remember, it's their money that's being used to bail out Greece. So if people in Germany are looking at the system in Greece and saying, well, you need to raise taxes and you need to cut programs, well, then that's what they need to do in order to get the money. But at the same time, that's what Greece has been doing, and it hasn't worked. So it's kind of interesting to see that they're being forced to do the exact same thing, except they're forced to go even further, and they're expected to somehow improve their economy that way.
Yeah, well, that gets to the final point, which Anna's very right about. Paul Krugman talks about this often, which is, okay, you're going to do more austerity, you're going to do more cuts. They're already at 26% unemployment.
And like 50 under 30.
Yeah, 50% unemployment for people under the age of 30. So how are the cuts actually going to help, or are they going to be counterproductive? So you're draining every last piece of blood from the rock, or whatever you call it, right? To get every last euro out of Greece, but it's actually hurting their economy and limiting their ability to generate revenue to pay you back with. So is this a reasonable compromise where you go, okay, that helps to bring their economy back a little bit, gives a little bit of revenue there, and then that might create a virtuous circle? This doesn't look like a virtuous circle to me.
No, now, it doesn't. It doesn't. And keep in mind, there were, the second most powerful country there in the Eurozone is France, and they were arguing on Greece's behalf. They were, they lost, and they lost rather resoundingly, but it doesn't mean they were wrong. Italy, too, the only two countries sort of in there fighting for a better deal for Greece.
And look, the Europeans will say that did this deal, well, we had to, you guys don't understand it. There's a lot of sophisticated details to this thing, and then we're putting 12.5 billion euros of the proceeds back into investments in Greece, and they'll have a host of those things. But to the naked eye, based on the terms here, from people who are familiar with finance, I mean, we're not financial kingpins here. We don't know the details of the deal in a way that a banker would, but they often use that as a excuse, like, oh, you folks could never figure it out. We're all so sophisticated and smart. You have to trust us. This is the best deal. Well, I don't trust you. It doesn't look like a good deal, not just for the Greeks, but for the rest of Europe. And I'm really worried about what it might lead to down the road. That's what I'm worried about.
It doesn't seem to me. It doesn't. Would you mean with the right in Greece, or
with anything? You break the Greek people's backs, and nothing good comes of that. Nothing.
No. Although my hunch is that you just end up, the most likely worst case scenario is that you end up in the same spot 12 months from now, and then and then they exit.
Yeah, and if I'm Cyprus, if you're asking me again what I would do, I would have been prepared to leave the euro, and if I'm not prepared now, believe me, in the next 12 months I'd get prepared.
Yeah, they don't have a plan to leave the euro. The Germans have a plan for Greece leaving the euro. The Greeks did not really have a plan for leaving the euro. That's what it appears now.
That doesn't speak well of the Greek government. No. So Greece and Germany have a lot of interesting history. And I read in a piece here that as Germans were occupying Greece during the World War II era, that Greeks' population went down. The Greeks lost 8% of their population. That's an unbelievable number. It was 7 million people were killed by the Germans, okay? So now, killed by the Germans, 7 million people were killed. I'm sure the Germans will argue, but no one will hear that argument out. Yeah. Okay, right?
In this case, it might actually be true. Killed by the Germans.
Yeah, right. So anyway you slice it, a gigantic, an unbelievable number. And it was, here's the amazing fact of the day, 10 times the death rate for the UK during the war.
Wow.
So the Greeks suffered at 10 times the rate of UK, who suffered tremendously during World War II at the hand of the Germans. So you turn around to the Greek people, we don't remember that. Nobody remembers the Greek occupation, right? In the rest of the world. Very, very few people talk about, remember the Greek occupation, right? They might say it about the Turks, but they don't say it about the Germans, right? And so, then you tell the Greek people, oh, those guys who took out, 8% of your population, killed 7 million people, Now you got to pay them back under these conditions. So it might not be relevant to us. It might not be relevant in a logical world, but in an emotional context, there's already posters up in Greece about how they show a German guy and says, this is the guy who sucked your blood dry, right? We're playing with fire here. We're playing with fire. I don't want to play with that fire.